Good morning, good evening. I want to welcome everyone to this exciting webinar today. We're going to be covering a very hot and timely topic around artificial intelligence and how enterprises can really harness the power of artificial intelligence, but do it with the proper oversight or governance in order to use this properly across the enterprise. I'm joined with my esteemed colleague, Liming Brotcke. Liming, would you mind introducing yourself?
Good morning, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm Liming Brotcke. I work for Ally Financials. Currently, I'm in the consumer commercial banking business line, risk line, leading the data science team. Previously, in the last 3.5 years, I was the head of model validation group at Ally. Before I joined Ally, I spent about 6 years at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, doing a variety of large and mega bank supervision, but focusing on credit risk as well as model risk management. Going way back to the history, after I finished my graduate school, I spent about 7 years between Discover Financial as well as Citigroup, doing a large, wide range of model development, implementation, and use. I have a PhD in economics from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you so much, Liming. My name is Dave Trier. I serve as the Vice President of Product for ModelOp. We're a company focused specifically on helping enterprises govern and scale their AI initiatives. So we'll be talking about, Liming and I will talk about assessing really what's the need? Why are we talking about model governance in the age of AI? We've had model governance frameworks, especially in the financial institutions, for years. So why do we need to think about this again? Second, we'll go into, okay, well, if we understand the context behind and some of the challenges, what are some of the key tenets, the guiding principles that we should be thinking about to govern overall usage of AI and ML across the enterprise? We'll then turn to some of the common pitfalls that we've seen over the years, ones that you want to avoid as you're getting started in modernizing your model governance capability. And finally, we'll wrap up with some of the recommendations to get started. But first, let's jump into a little bit of the context around this. So if you think about artificial intelligence, you've seen all the headlines around ChatGPT, right? It's been all the buzz, all the craze of, okay, well, how do we use ChatGPT within our enterprise? This could really be game-changing. That sounds fantastic, but there's also a risk associated with using these types of new capabilities, these artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities. So with that, Liming, maybe we can just start by talking about some of the challenges that modern enterprises face as they're trying to embrace new artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other use cases as it relates to the overall use of analytics.
Yes, absolutely. I think for any modern enterprise, we do have a heavy reliance on different quantitative solutions. In a simple format, you can classify them as models or qualitative models. But in the last 6 or 7 years, with artificial intelligence and machine learning, pick up a lot of interest in our financial sector. I think it makes things even more complex. So going back to our main focus today for the model governance, first, this is one of the kind of strong pillars if we look at any supervisory guidance. We do have 3 sections that you need to focus on what the model developer, model owner, need to be responsible for. Then you move on to this entire section of model validation, how to fully demonstrate your effective challenge, during those review for the entire process. Last but not least, we also need to build a very robust, transparent governance framework. So what does that mean to our institutions nowadays? First, everybody probably has seen this very healthy, in part, it's an organic growth for your model inventory. And secondly, it's also the situational driven. As David mentioned, now when AI and ML become such an important component for the tools we can consider to leverage and use, it quickly adds up on what can be considered as a model. So with this fast and forever growing model governance, your responsibility, how do we manage this? How do we make sure this very dynamic nature of the growth is fully captured and timely reflected for everybody to see. Okay, I do have a good control. I understand where things may need a different size, different additional oversight. So I think this is very important for the governance function. We need to be aware of this growth, and we need to be understanding it's no longer static, like how we started working on model governance from about 15 years ago. And the other thing I felt like as everything becomes more automated, standardized, and going into digital, the timely reporting, both for your internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders, I'm talking about external auditors and your variety of regulators, it's very important at any point in time. For your internal stakeholders, different business lines, they will have reliance on a different suite of models versus other supporting functions. To what extent the governance function can produce that and make a very timely modification to suit the internal and external stakeholders' need. I think this is a must-have if you want to build this functionality. Third is we are having this life cycle concept. It's not just on paper. This model life cycle concept is very, very real. For a long time, we focus more on as a develop the model, finishing the initial validation so the model can be used. Everybody understands the limitations and the strengths. But once the model is fully deployed and used in production, there'll be other things, the performance monitoring. Not every model is going to give you the beautiful green status. It's either internal factors or exogenous components is going to make the model to stay or go into breach status from time to time. And what if you have ongoing outstanding issues that takes longer time to remediate, even from the initial validation? So there's a lot of other things that can happen during the model's continued use. To what extent the governance can come up with a solution or platform to seamlessly connecting all those important stages within that model life cycle. And to a broader perspective, the issue management, change management, those are very important. We're going to touch in particular on the change management later on during this presentation, but that's another important thing to consider for the model governance to be robust and stable for a long time. Last but not least, talent recruiting and retention. Unlike the model validation function, the quantitative skill sets are very transferable. You typically see folks moving between development to validation, vice versa, or some of them eventually went to own a particular business. For model governance, on the surface, you see, oh, this is model governance. Those are the math people. But governance actually doesn't require that strong set of mathematical or quantitative skills. However, it requires a different skill set. In a modern financial institution, the ability to manage different software, the ability to write computer or codes, programming to summarize, aggregate very rich and complex information into something transparent and easy to read for your users and your audience is also important. At our institution, we started in the last couple of years to intentionally recruiting model governance talent with the computer science technology, so that really enhances on their reporting and also this connection among different milestones or segments within the life cycle.
Thank you so much, Liming. Overall, I think you couldn't have said it better, that there are a couple of key points that I just wanted to, we'll double click on as we talk more, but I just wanted to reiterate. I think the first one that you hit on is that in today's world, that in the past, that most models, if you will, models that are used for helping with business decisioning were very static. They didn't change very often, right? And now you've got this new AI and ML world where they're constantly updating, constantly changing. So the status quo of that static way that you do model governance is no longer going to work, right? That's where you need to move from a static world to a dynamic world. So you are dynamically understanding what type of different AI, ML, and traditional statistical and other models are being used, collecting all the information about those from a governance perspective. That is paramount overall. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the second thing that I think was really interesting was around the model life cycle. And that's particularly important, as you can see some of the stats that I'm pulling up on screen here, where what we've seen in our experience with some of our customers at ModelOp, but across the industry in general, is that as a model goes through its full life cycle from inception of an idea all the way through usage and monitoring and eventual retirement, that there are so many different teams involved, so many different systems involved, so many different quality controls, change management, independent validation, as you mentioned earlier. There's so many different steps and teams involved that, again, the modern enterprise has to take the model life cycle into account in a much more dynamic, and we'll talk about this, automated fashion. So I'm really glad you brought up that point overall. And really what you're seeing here is a couple of data points that we've seen across our customers, which just really has the need for model governance being redone to modernize that. You'll see that the average growth of the number of models being used is 20 to 30% across the industry. We have customers that are using 20 to 30 different tools for developing models and actually running these models. As I mentioned before, there's so many different teams involved. So you have all of this context of really great opportunity with these AI and ML capabilities, but you have this complexity, growth, the variety of different models, all the different teams and tools involved, that it just necessitates a more modern way to do model governance. And don't worry, we'll talk a little bit about some of the key tenets and guiding principles to help you get on your way overall. But before we get into that, so you have all these different contexts in terms of complexity, but then you also have, as Liming mentioned, that there are regulatory restrictions and guidance, I should say, overall, that are starting to grow as it relates to AI and ML. Now, I'm really glad Liming's here because she's been in the financial world for many, many years, and the financial world has had regulatory guidance from the Federal Reserve for many years, whereas other industries not necessarily have had as robust of a model governance guidance overall. But that's changing. As you can see here that we have NIST has just put out the AI risk management framework, which is really relevant to all different industries. The EU has put out the AI Act that was a draft proposal in 2021, which again will apply to all industries. There's the California Attorney General that has also put out a recent request to all the California healthcare providers. So all of the learnings that have been done in the financial world really are being possible to extend into other industries overall. So I'm really excited to have Liming here to help share her experience in having done model governance for many years within the financial services industry. Okay, so we gave that background, right? So we have this really powerful capability around AI and ML, but we have the challenges that we mentioned where we need to move to a more dynamic world. We need to have systematic model lifecycle control. We need to take into account all these risk management frameworks. So what do? Right? So what are some of the key tenets that we should be taking into account, Liming, when we're thinking about modernizing our model governance framework? Liming?
So for the AI and machine learning model governance framework, I think first, depending upon the financial institution size, we have so far seen very different, big variety of practice. So for the really large banks, the category 1, category 2, and category 3 banks, essentially you are going to see as model inventory continues to grow, and you will maintain this core piece. As David mentioned a few moments ago, a lot of traditional conventional regressions continue to play a very critical role. But at the same time, in particular, if we look at the non-core banking operations, so we're going out from the credit risk, market liquidity risk, into something a little bit more tangible related to operational risk or cybersecurity, right, or other compliance risk. So you see more and more leverage and adoption of the more advanced modern techniques. Some of the machine learning techniques are actually developed just within the last 2 decades. So with that, the super mega banks or the really large, if you consider quantify that, the consolidated asset, if you are 125 billion above banks, you probably have the governance framework already fully established. There are 2 schools of practice right now. Some of the banks started to establish a separate AI, ML model governance as well as validation process. But there's a lot of other more banks by saying we have a pretty robust framework. AI and ML models are not going to, at least in the near future, to completely outweigh my other traditional regressions. So how about I just modify my existing framework, existing process to emphasize the uniqueness? How do we actually address those idiosyncratic features and functions brought to us by AI and ML? So I think with that, as the guiding principles listed here, visibility is most important. Regardless of the underlying tools we are dealing with, we really need to make sure it's not just serving the internal folks within model governance, but also for your general audience, your bank partners. Everybody need to understand what's recorded, why it's recorded, and what's changing at what cadence, what frequency. And automation becomes so very important because that's where we need to continue to aim for better efficiency. So one of the beauty about AI and ML tools is it really changes fundamentally how we operate. Things that traditionally takes much longer time, and now within this already established framework, you can do things a lot faster. A short, quick example. In the past, when you go through your application material, let's talk about the auto loan or the mortgage application, you have to go through a lot of financial papers provided by either your consumer borrowers or your other commercial lenders. So that takes a lot of time. When humans are performing this manual work, depending upon the experience, depending upon the time in the day when they perform this duty, errors, human errors are just inevitable. But when you replace some of those very tedious, time-consuming work with machine learning algorithm that can do this systematic, and they're always going to give you the consistency. The machine is never tired as humans. They do not have a bad day, right? So, that can, again, in efficiency is very important, and it's very appealing for banking professionals to consider and adopt. But with that, it really promotes the need for automation. Otherwise, I think you're going to quickly get into this bottleneck. You have this big incoming of work, and the individual model become more and more complex in certain way or shape. How do we actually leverage that automation concept to execute in establishing and modifying the governance framework is going to really help you to stay competitive.
Absolutely, Ming. I think you hit the nail on the head. What we like to say is that you really can't govern what you don't see. It starts with visibility. You have to know about all the different types of models that are being used for different use cases, irregardless of whether that was developed with an open source capability or used a proprietary or cloud-based framework, or you bought a third-party vendor model overall. So it really starts with visibility, just getting an understanding of where is AI and ML used across the entire enterprise. And then from there, as you want to scale, well, you can't scale without automation. You've seen so many different new business models in the digital world that really use automation as their foundation. And so I'm really glad you touched on that point overall. And the other piece that I think is really important to take away here is, especially in the financial world, you have this model governance framework overall that you've had in place for many, many years. So it's really about extending on what you have already put into place with some of the, again, different pieces that are unique to AI and ML. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for those outside the financial world, you can really start to think about using that model, framework, I should say, that the financials have been using for many years as the foundation for how you do model governance going forward, to be able to leverage the AI and ML capabilities, but do it with the right and proper guardrails in place overall. What you're seeing on screen here is a couple of the key capabilities, if you will, that you should think about with the model governance framework. You may already have an existing one, but these are, again, just capabilities that should be in place or start to be put into place as you're thinking about using AI and ML more at scale overall. So we talked a lot about visibility, and we talked a lot about automation, but you got to think about all the different aspects that could go wrong with the model, right? It's not just did the model perform correctly overall. That's obviously very important, but how does it relate to the overall business performance? So if you think about it, you want to use models to improve your business, whether that's cost efficiency or top line revenue growth. So are those models actually providing the results that you would expect? You, of course, want to make sure that models are adhering to all legal, risk, ethical, and bias type reviews. All of those have been done and in place. But as you think about scaling the use, you also need to make sure that there's the right process controls, especially with the new technologies in the AI space. You have this auto ML, right? You have cloud capabilities that can go and develop a model for you very quickly. That's great. But what we've seen, I'm sure Liming might have seen this as well, what we've seen is that these data scientists or analysts that are using some auto ML, they hit a button, and now it's being used for production decisioning. Well, that's not really the best way to go forward, because you want to make sure that there's a proper governance and oversight to ensure that there's quality controls, ensure that there's risk controls that are in place, ensure that everything that's done is auditable and reproducible, and it also needs to be integrated into your overall company-wide governance framework. So again, just a couple of key things to think about as you're looking to modernize your model governance framework. I'll just say one little aside here, and I'll invite Liming to comment on this as well. There's a lot of buzz around AI. All you need to think about is just ethical fairness and bias. And that's fine, absolutely. But you have to think about all the other contexts as it relates to a model. Like I said, the business performance, all the other compliance and legal reviews, process controls, quality controls, is it audible, reproducible, et cetera. So again, please, as a takeaway here, make sure that you have the full and comprehensive view of your model, your processes, your overall governance procedures as it relates to using AI and ML.
That is very true, Dave. I just have one more point. We started our conversation today. The key focus is AI and ML. However, one important thing to always keep in mind is how do you internally define AI and ML? Not every artificial intelligence solution or machine learning solution necessarily fits into the model definition prescribed by the primary regulators like OCC and the Federal Reserve. However, loosely speaking, if you just take a look of the definition, the three parts, every AI probably can be qualified or classified as model. But the question for all of you guys is, do you really need to do that? So one thing, as I have spent about 7 years looking really into this AI and ML field, the more I learned, the more I felt like, only a portion of those AI ML solutions potentially should be put under the oversight and governance of model risk. So in that case, what about others? They truly are artificial intelligence solutions helping your bank to do things better and faster. How do you collaborate and partner with your other IT, for instance, business partners, to still have a good recognition and inventory to capture the presence and usage of other tools?
Absolutely, Ming. And we keep talking about, again, AI and ML models and having governance around those. But again, you have to have the full context and understanding of how they're being used, which is incredibly important overall. And I'll just kind of just turn to, okay, well, this looks like a lot, especially for the non-financials that have never done model governance, but Don't worry. There are capabilities and there's software that is helping organizations across the industry to really to lay down a proper model governance framework for the age of AI. Just as an example with visibility, some of the key things that you want to make sure that you understand is really just visibility into all the different models, regardless of if it's an open source or proprietary or cloud-based or you bought it, where it's being used across the enterprise. You want to see if there are any issues that are arising around it, but you also want to make sure that those models have gone through the right model governance and risk processes. So you have a view into where are all these different potential models or use cases in the process, where are they in terms of the independent review, etc. And all this you want to do and make sure that you've done in an auditable, reproducible way that, again, has gone through and made sure that every single model being used for production business decisioning is adhering to your governance policy and procedure. This is incredibly important, especially, again, in the age of this auto ML, where you can just click a button and you can use this in production decisioning. No, you have a governance policy and procedure that has been written specifically to protect your organization from any potential risk, whether that's business, legal, compliance, etc. So you want to make sure that you have a capability that is ensuring, again, every single model has actually gone through the right steps, the right reviews, the right approvals, and that they can be reproduced and auditable overall. So with that, we talked a little bit about some of the guiding principles. Let's turn a little bit to some of the pitfalls that we've seen. So Liming, maybe just talk about some of the challenges or pitfalls that you've seen fellow colleagues or peers run into as they're trying to think about modern model governance.
I think the challenge is always there, and you're always going to encounter new challenges. However, I think it also gives us the wonderful opportunities to look for alternative solutions or brand new solutions. So the first thing I think, how do we deal with those common pitfalls? You got to stay calm. For bankers like me, we have been in this mix for a long time, so we kind of learned a few useful things. But if I'm working with somebody who hasn't been under this very intense regulation in a banking industry, what do? You can't wait any longer. But in order to start on the right foot, it's really important to understand, okay, what are the information you need to capture in order to provide this visibility for all your potential users. So what are going to be the most important thing for everybody to capture? David talked about this thing about we used to have models developed in some very well understand regressions. And we used to implement models either on the desktop or on the mainframe. But AI and ML introduced a new dynamic. Essentially, we're going to cloud. We're going to this different space. So that fact itself requires a lot of new knowledge to be picked up by the governance folk to understand the implementation platform. So essentially, outside of the desktop implementation on premise, you need to also introduce this cloud. But within cloud, are you talking about AWS? You're going into your nucleus. And even within those cloud space, what packages are your developers use to produce this solution? Or are they using the same package to support the sustainable production? All of those details need to be discussed upfront in order to establish your governance framework, so you know what is important. There's a traditional things like, okay, who develops this model? At what frequency they plan to recalibrate or refresh? Those things I think are working with your friends from the banking industry. People can share the best practice with you and help you to quickly get those basic items covered. But it takes a lot of internal discussion. Governance shouldn't work alone. This is an enterprise effort. Governance and model risk can start this conversation, but you really need to form that partnership with a lot of others, in particular your IT function, in order to build this right. If you want to introduce that automation piece in there to start with. So we talked a couple times so far on the ethical fairness. This is going to be one of the top focuses for all of the banks in the next foreseeable years. However, this question is really important, but the answer is by no means easy, because the fairness is such a broad concept. Are we talking about fair lending fairness, which has a little more direct implication when we talk about ethical fairness? But we also have a lot of other type of fairness related to the general bias concept. So this conversation will continue. But again, in order to introduce or incorporate this piece into your governance, the conversation, again, should be broader. Your compliance officers, your legal partners, they have been traditionally more invested in this particular area than the quantitative folks in validation and governance. So how do you make sure what you consider appropriate it may be perceived differently by legal and compliance? So start that conversation early on, try to work together to reach to a consensus is going to help you to make that governance framework meet everybody's needs.
Yeah, thanks, Liming. And I think you said it perfectly, is that overall that the ethical fairness is a very much a hot topic. And again, the banking industry has had the capability around model governance for years. But what I've seen in other industries is that when these executives at the enterprise level are saying, oh, we need model governance. Okay, well, we'll just go look at this ethical fairness tool and that should solve all my governance needs. Well, when you think about it, they don't have any model governance capability or framework in place at all. That's probably not where I would start, as you probably would as well. I mean, you're getting the foundation right in place of having a proper model inventory that's comprehensive and dynamic so that you have visibility. And then laying down some of the process and quality controls, which include independent reviews and those sorts of things as part of the model lifecycle. It would be another area that would start. And then, yes, of course, ethical fairness needs to be a part of the conversation. So again, as we look outside to other industries, this has been a big pitfall that I've seen, is that, again, these enterprises are saying and just keying in specifically on, ethical fairness. But you need to lay the foundation in place first, of which ethical fairness and evaluation of that is very, very important, but it can't be the only thing that you're looking at. The only final thing I would say is that a pitfall that I've seen across the enterprises, both financials and non-financials overall, is really attempting to build internally. And that may have worked in the past, right, as we had these static models for the most part. But now that you're in this dynamic world with a variety of different tools, the complexity around what's being used for different types of use cases, it's just an area where the pace of innovation is too rapid. It's very, very challenging for any organization, especially an internal IT that's already strapped, to be able to keep pace with that level of change and innovation. So this is an area, again, where attempting to build internally has really proved to be a challenge overall. So, Liming, let's wrap up and talk about how we can help organizations that are looking to modernize their model governance. How do they get started? What would you say, Liming, are the couple of things that you would recommend to your fellow peers and colleagues out there?
Yeah, I'll emphasize on the first two, having you to opine on the last two. I think in order to do it right, it's really an enterprise-wide effort. Just at my own organization, years back, our model governance starts with a large Excel spreadsheet, which sounds like a really dated, right? Are we coming from the Stone Age? Well, we're not, but that actually speaks about the evolution. When you have a short, small model inventory, everything is so straightforward, easy. You can do with that. So to David's point, you can start building this simple function, but as you see, very fast growth and the complexity being gradually introduced, and they're not getting easier. So we actively looked into having the professionals to develop something for us. As a result, this is really makes a huge difference. But we clearly communicate what is our need. You work with your vendors; they produce this staged plan. What can be easily done? Those low-hanging fruits can be quickly can be quickly executed. And then you have something that may take over a year and a half or over 2 years, but work with them because the nice thing about working with vendors is that they do have a lot of experience than our individual team. I'm not saying we do not have the talent, or we do not have the skill sets, but you're also going against the time, to what extent you need to get this one ready and up and running. So for the team effort, internally, model risk should probably be leading this effort. But if you're getting onto that path, you also need to work with your issue management because you want to create that seamless integration. You want things that you are managing to also have a nice connection with the downstream or vice versa. If you are a heavy user of for the third-party suppliers, right, and they are all different models, you also want to make sure you work with the third-party risk management team to make sure what you're building out is going to help them and help you as well. So the team effort, the team collaboration cannot be emphasized more. And the sponsorship, this is a large project, and typically you're going to invest that in a course of, as short as 6 months, as long as 2 to 3 years, because governance continues need to be modified and expanded. So having identified that sponsorship, who are going to be your speaker, be your cheerleading at the senior, in particular at the C-suite level, emphasize why we are investing in this space. It's easy for the business line to say, okay, I'm going into this market, this is the profitability. It's harder for this type of function to get the funding because, people were like, yeah, this is just compliance. No, it's not a compliance. It really boils down to, can we provide the best and most efficient service to our business line? So I think having that sponsorship and emphasize the value-adding perspective of this solution is critical as well.
Absolutely, Liming. At the end of the day, AI and ML, and just in analytics in general, is a business capability, right? It's helping to drive better business decisioning, more operational efficiency. So it is about not just a risk and cost center type function, but rather around the business. So collaborating across all the different teams is paramount. And I think I wanted to hit just to round out, you mentioned this previously, but around using experience in the industry. One of the things that we found is that, yes, if you're getting started with a modern model governance framework, you want to make sure you do your quick analysis. But the real way to actually show market improvement is just get going with an implementation pilot. Start in one area and iteratively expand from there. Use your vendors, use your partners to be able to ensure that you have actual practical implementation of this model governance. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting in an analysis paralysis, as we like to say, for very long, because the pace of innovation just changes really rapidly overall. And I think we already touched upon this. It's just the change management involved overall that's part of this is something that needs to be accounted. Obviously, we all want to veer towards talking about the fun technical pieces, but there is a process that needs to include training, policy enhancements, identification of champions as a way that I've seen to be really successful, to be able to have stewards across all the different teams to really be the voice of, okay, model governance forward, here's what we need to be doing, here's why it's valuable to the business as a whole, and here's the right way to do it overall. So again, just a couple of key points of how you get started. Have the team, have the sponsorship, do some quick analysis, but then actually get into the practical implementation and combine that not only technical, but with the training, the process, and policy enhancements overall. So let me just wrap up by a couple of the key pieces that we talked about today. First and foremost is that hopefully you got a sense that model governance has been in place for financials, but it's something that needs to be augmented to accommodate AI and ML. For the non-financials that may not have a model governance framework in place, it can look to some of the existing processes and techniques that have been used in financials and other regulated industries for years. But the second is that you can't wait, right? This is something that is coming quickly. Again, with ChatGPT taking so much press out there, it's not something that you can sit back and wait for years and years to come. You need to start to put a plan into action and to actually move forward. The third is that I talked a little bit about this, but especially if you don't have a model governance framework today, that you need to make sure that it's thought about in a comprehensive fashion, because overall models, AI, ML, models in general really have a business, a data, IT, a risk, security, and many other contexts overall. So you need to make sure that you have a comprehensive way to manage and govern the risk around those types of situations. And finally, I know we talked about that this is a journey overall, but it is something that you can get started in and have the workings of a proper scalable model governance frameworks in months. This is not doesn't need to be a multi 10-year process overall, but you can actually, as I talked about, get started incrementally, have feedback from the business, and then grow from there overall. So again, I hope you were able to take away a few key tenets, some lessons learned, how to avoid some pitfalls, if you will, and how to get started overall. Liming, I thank you so much for your time today and your insight and your counsel and experience. And I'll just offer overall that Liming and I love talking about model governance overall within enterprises. If you ever want to get in touch with us, we'd be happy to have a conversation. But thank you again, Liming, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me here. Hopefully we are providing a few useful tips for audience to consider. But as Dave mentioned, please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Liming. And with that, that concludes the webinar. Thank you all.